So one of the things about being an archaeologist in Ireland is when you're driving along the road, you will often see a ringfort off to the left. You'll keep on driving and then you'll see another one. But you should keep your eyes on the road. If you happen to be in a car that's been driven by a friend and you're using Google Earth, then you'll go, there's a ringfort, there's another one, there's a ringfort, oh, there's a ringfort just over there. And that's because they are the most common archaeological monument in Ireland. Early medieval ringforts, we estimate we have about 60,000 of them. And that includes the ones we can see today and the ones that are revealed very frequently in big roadway schemes. So in areas like County Meath, where there aren't an awful lot of them, there are lots of them. I want to say huge, lots of them on the pathway of the M3, the M2, and so on, and similarly across Ireland. So what are they? They're farmsteads. They're enclosed farmsteads, enclosed by usually a bank and a ditch. Sometimes more often you might have a stone wall on top of it, or you might have a bank and a ditch and a bank and a ditch, so they'd be bivalves, or very rarely you'll have a multivalve ringfort, which might be 3 or 4 enclosures, and they seem to be markers of status. In terms of their chronology, they start building them around the 560s onwards. There's an explosion of activity in the late 6th century and into the 7th century, which leads to the sheer numbers that we have. And I think if you were walking through early medieval Ireland in the 7th century, you would have seen these newly built all over the place. And what are they? They're residences. They're places where people live. They're dwellings. They're settlements. They're farmsteads. They're places where people lived out their lives within an enclosure. And inside that enclosure, they might have 2 or 3 houses of various different types of architectural style, depending on where you are in the country. They could be made of stone or could be made of post and wattle. And those houses usually about 6 or 7 metres across. And then in the vicinity or inside the enclosure, you'll get all kinds of other activities like iron working or bronze working, or sometimes you'll get pits which could be used for rubbish. Occasionally you'll get evidence for essentially outdoor toilets. You would have some animals inside, maybe pigs, perhaps you might keep them inside, but they're the place for the people. It's where people live. Imagine them as a farmstead. They're kind of a farmyard. So the winter, the household would include mother and father, grandparents maybe an aunt and uncle or siblings, children perhaps 7 or 8. And in the more prosperous sites, you might have labourers. You might even have slaves if you were quite well off, as well as kind of hens and that kind of thing. It's where you might process food, and then in the evening you'd gather at night time inside the house to tell stories, to exchange news, to cook food, to sleep, and so on. These are places where people lived. They're often known in Irish folklore today as fairy forts, and there's a distinct reason for that. These ring forts were being occupied, particularly in the west of Ireland, well into the late Middle Ages. Plenty of evidence for that, and we also have cartographic and historical evidence that were being occupied up to the time of the 9 Years' War, so the beginning of the 17th century. And gradually then they started to be abandoned. And a really interesting social or historical phenomenon occurs by about 1800, and people have forgotten what they were. And an aspect of society is that forgetting is as active a process as remembering. By the 18th century, by the 19th century, they're no longer useful. People didn't live there anymore, and people forgot what they were. And that's when you get the appearance of ideas into the 19th century of them being fairy forts, and places that, certainly were protected by belief in fairies, that you wouldn't cut down a tree there or disturb them because bad luck or even worse would fall upon you. But for me as an archaeologist, these are places where real, living, breathing people lived and worked and raised their children and tended animals and grew crops and processed food and did all of the ordinary things of daily life. So to dismiss that and just say they're fairy forts or sacred circles or some such nonsense, I think it's just dismissive of actually genuine people who lived 1,000 years ago in Ireland. And they're fantastic. I love ring forts. This one, by the way, is in Aghaleague townland. I think if if I am where I think I am, it's Rathnaduff, the Black Fort, or the Fort of the Black, I think. Anyway, what you can see there is a bank. It's on a steep slope, so it slopes down itself, which would kind of help with drainage. It's hard to see where the entrance is. It's possibly it there, but it's covered with ferns and irises and flowers, weeds and so on right now. And there you go, it's got a fairy tree in it. And there are the interiors where you'd get all the archaeological evidence from people's lives. You can see here, looking down the slope, covered in ferns now, and preserved within this lovely meadow. When I came up, I kept right up against that ditch. If you walk across the meadow, keep to the edge. Lovely sight. You can see here where it is, at the bottom of that very steep slope, set in here. It would have marvellous views. I'm always on about marvellous views. Marvellous views off here, off to the east. So the rising sun would rise across that hill over there. 1,000 years ago. God bless them, wherever they are.